In this video, I'm going to show you how I approach a final mix for my songs here in GarageBand. So let's go. Hi, my name is Pete, and this is Studio Live today, where my passion is helping you create, record, and release your best music. And in this video, I'm going to show you my approach to doing a final mix for a song I'm working on at the moment called Things Change. Now, this is a collaboration of sorts. I wrote the original song, and then the amazing Dan Baker actually recorded violins for me on this track, which sound amazing. And I think the reason it's taken me so long to get around to mixing is I want to make sure the track sounds good, because Dan is a great musician and I want to do justice to his performance. But anyway, if you want to check out the original video where he recorded those violins, that's linked right up there, and I'll also include it at the end of this video. But what we're going to do here is I'm going to dive into my most recent mix of this, and what I'm doing now is I'm doing my final mix. So I've done a static mix, I've got things sounding about where I want them to be. This is where I'm going to do my final tweak. So we're talking EQ, compression, automation, reverb, and other effects. So if you are working on a project, or if you want to learn how I approach this, then this is the video for you. Let's dive in now and take a look at GarageBand here on the iPad. All right, let's get started here. The first thing I do with any project, if I'm doing a major change, is I actually duplicate the project first. So let's tap select and tap duplicate, and then I'm going to rename this over to version 7. That way, if I make some major colossal mistakes, I can have that version 6 there ready to fall back on. So let's tap and jump into this. This is my song. Now let's take a quick tour of it first. It's actually one piano part here, but it's separated into 2 tracks, and I'll tell you why that is as we go through. We've got my lead vocal. Now I've only got one vocal in this whole track, so no backing vocals. It's going to be quite a simple process for the vocal here, which we'll go through. We've got stereo guitars. So these are doubled guitars. So we've got one panned hard to the left and one panned hard to the right. So that creates a nice stereo spectrum feel, but it's the exact same guitar part, just recorded twice. And yes, you do need to record a double twice. You can't just copy it and paste it and then put it left and right. It won't actually make the sound any different. It'll just make it twice as loud. Anyway, we'll talk a little bit more about that later. We then have my string section, and I love that I get to say that. So we have 3 violins here creating a violin harmony part, and then Dan has also recorded an amazing lead violin part, which is this part here. So that is the way the track is laid out here. Now I have all of these other dud tracks at the top here, and what I'm going to do is these are my sort of original scratch recordings. I'm actually going to get rid of all of these because these are just sitting here taking up processing power. I'm never going to want to reincorporate them, and they're saved over in version 6 anyway. So let's delete all of these by just tapping right here on the icon and tapping delete, and now we're all clean up, and even these ones down here. So I was playing around with some other ideas here. We'll delete them. So now we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So we've only got 9 tracks in this song, and it's just going to be a fairly simple, basic kind of arrangement, let's just take a quick listen to it. So we'll go to the middle section here, and this is what our song sounds like.
It's a hope of kings and peasants too. It's a dream of...
So it's sounding good. We've got our rough mix dialed in, and the reason that this is not going to take long and we're not going to be here for hours is that I mix as I record. I mix on the way in. Now, some folks will record everything 100% dry, which means that they won't add any effects, they won't add any compression, they won't do any EQing. I like to actually hear what it's going to sound like and mix as I go. So it doesn't matter which way you do it, but this way, for me, it's a lot quicker and a lot easier to do. So I will come in here. So for instance, I've already got on these vocals, I've already got my plugins and EQs. I've got my track echo on there, track reverb, the visual EQs all dialed in there. My compression settings are dialed in, and I will show you all of these in a moment, but that's just to show you. And I've even done the automation. So I always say leave automation to the end. I've kind of broken my own rules here because we might need to do some tweaks to the automation on the vocals, which we'll go through as we go and get into this. So now you've got a bit of an overview. You know what the track is and you know how we're set up. Let's jump in and start looking at the actual mixing process. So let's start with the guitars, because this was the instrument that I recorded first. This was the whole idea of the track. So I'm just going to solo one of these guitars just so that you can have a listen to the start of this track. This is what the introduction sounds like. If you're listening on stereo, you'll hear that that's panned over to the far right. If we introduce the other track, So you can hear there that it is it's sounding good. Like with the stereo sound on there, it really makes it pop. So let's come back here now. You'll notice on here that I've got some automation on these guitars. So let's tap on the guitar icon there, jump into automation, and we'll see what I'm actually doing here. Okay, so all I'm really doing is dropping the volume down in this section here. And yeah, sorry, I won't distract you with the vocal automation. And we've got a fade out at the end. So I wanted to do this because I really wanted to hear what these guitars sounded like in this middle section. So what they do at this point is this. So they're playing in the nice sort of loud bit. And then we have this really quiet where I just wanted the piano and the vocals to really overcome and be there. And then at the end here, you'll notice it actually goes up to a louder volume for this final chorus for this part here. And what you're hearing there is that the guitars are slightly different. So I try to play them as close to the same as possible, but it's those slight variations that actually help you, especially when you've got a stereo pair of guitars like this. Don't be afraid if they're slightly different, because it's actually going to add to that overall feel that you get. If they're identical, it won't work as well. I mean, it doesn't mean try to play them differently, but your natural differences you're going to play are going to help you out. So that's the guitars we have. Let's take a little quick look at the processing we have on these. We'll jump into the processing here. I use some pretty basic standard compression. I literally put the compressor on there, leave the default settings, and then I'll only adjust the ratio and the threshold up and down if I need to. Won't be going into a heap about compression here and how I dial in compression, but there's a compressor video linked up the top there and down in the description if you want some more information at the end of this video. But in short, the higher ratio means the more compression. The threshold controls when the compressor will kick in, and then our attack is how quickly the compression happens. So I've got quite a slow attack on these, 32 milliseconds, a very small amount of compression, and it's not really actually going to be over compressing these guitars. I didn't want a very compressed guitar sound. We've got some track reverb on these, so I've just added a fairly default standard reverb on there that sounded good out of the gate, and I've got a visual EQ, which is actually boosting a little bit of the bass and rolling off some of the treble of these. So I wanted to create some space for the violins and the vocals to sit up the top. So this isn't what I would always do with acoustic guitars, but again, as Dan Baker, who did the violins on this track, says, if it sounds good, it is good. So don't be afraid to just experiment and try different things. But again, if you're listening to this and you think the guitars sound bad and we should have more treble in there, then let me know. So that's the basics of how our guitars are set up here. The one final thing is that I use a lot of, in my mixing, I use a lot of echo and reverb. So down the bottom here, and actually you'll notice that I've dialed in a little bit more on one of these tracks than the other. Yeah, it's a little bit more reverb on that one. We'll just up that a little bit. So I use these master effects a lot now. The master effects, we tap on the master effects button there, and we can actually determine which one we have. So the echo, I've got an eighth note echo. So that's sort of like a fairly fast sort of echo, like a doot, 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 doot. In fact, let's take a listen. We'll just solo this one, and we'll turn this echo up really quick so you can actually hear what this sounds like. So it sounds terrible, right? If you have that much of it, but with just a little bit of that eighth note echo in this track and this track, it really does just add to the fullness. And the same with the reverb. So the reverb I've selected in here, if we go in and look at my master effect reverb, I'm using the cathedral reverb. So because this is an acoustic track, I wanted a large reverb sound. And again, let's do the same thing with this. We've got it soloed. Let's just pump up the reverb here and take a listen to what the reverb is sounding like. And again, sounds terrible when you have that much of it, but if we dial it back, and all of these effects are actually stereo effects, so keep that in mind when you're adding these sort of effects. You'll hear that even though I've got just the right soloed, when we turn up this reverb, it's reverberating over onto the left. If you're listening on stereo speakers or headphones, you'll be able to hear that. So keep that in mind with your dialing in of your effects. That sometimes if you're like, hey, why am I hearing a bit of that over there? It's probably because you've got a delay or a reverb that's a stereo effect, and that is actually sending it over to your other channel. Keep that in mind because, yeah, it's a trap for young players. I've been trapped by it before myself. So there's our guitar sounds. Like I said, I think whilst the playing isn't perfect, I think it fits nicely in the song. And yeah, as we go through this, you'll probably be like, Pete, why didn't you re-record that little bit of vocal or that little bit of guitar? Yes, I could have. I'm at the point with this song where I want to get it finished, and I know that sounds like, oh, don't you want it to be better or as good as it can be? Yeah, I do, but I've got other songs to write. I've got other things to do. I want to get this done. Like I talk about this a lot, but the importance of finishing and releasing your music is super, super high, and I want to get this one done. Let's move on from the guitars now. And let's move over to our vocals. Now, we won't spend as much time on each individual instrument as we did on guitars because I use a lot of the same concepts. So when we're talking about EQ, we're talking about compression, reverb, delay, all these effects. But vocals is a particular one that you need to spend a bit of time with. So we're going to spend some time talking about the vocals here. So here is my lead vocal. I will solo it. It sounds like this.
It's a common misconception. It's a thing that many...
So it's deliberately made to sound that little bit overdriven, that little bit breathy, a little bit sort of overcompressed sound. And that's the desired outcome I went for here. And how did I do that? Well, I went into my plugins and EQ. First thing you'll notice here is that the compression is super heavy. So I've got an 8:1 compression ratio here. Let's just play this back. I'll turn the compressor off and you'll hear the difference. So this is with it on.
fear
And turning it off.
that the comfort that we have right now.
So you can hear when I turn the compressor on, it just brings that vocal up front. Because we got the piano, we got the violins, we got the guitars going on, I wanted that to be quite up front and present. If you think it's a bit overdone, well, let me know. That's what these videos are for. Let me know in the comments if you've got any other suggestions on that. So that is, and again, we've got a quicker attack here. So as opposed to the guitars, where we compress them very lightly, with this one, the threshold's pulled down, the ratio's pushed up, we're doing heavier compression. So play around with your compression. Don't be afraid to experiment. This one, we've got some additional 16th note track echo on here, so only a tiny little bit there, and you might think, oh, it's not really doing much, and it's probably not. But yeah, when I was dialing this in, I just wanted a little bit of extra track echo. The enhanced tuning is on. Now, to check how much of that I have, I tap on the microphone icon because these ones are all out here. So I've got a tiny bit of pitch control on here. And again, I do sing pretty well. I hit most of the notes, but I'm not ashamed to use a little bit of pitch control and enhanced tuning. If you want to learn all about how to use auto tune, pitch control, enhanced tuning, whatever you want to call it, there's a video up there and down in the description as well. You can check that out. So that's on there. I use overdrive. Now, I use a very small amount of this, and I use it in almost all my vocals. The reason being is it adds just that little bit of that gravelly tone, that presence that you get from an overdriven signal. So you don't want to go nuts and really push it up, but I like having a little bit of drive. So let's just play this, and I'll turn it off and on again. You can take a listen.
Is going to disappear.
So it just gives it that little bit of crispiness. Now, I've only got 0.75 dB. Let's turn this up and take a listen to what it will sound like if we do too much.
The only thing that stays the same is that things will change.
In fact, I think about 0.5 dB is enough for that one. You can dial in the tone there. In fact, the tone I might even bring back a little bit. Come on, I picked a bad spot.
And you can choose to keep.
Yeah, so there you go. We might actually bring that drive tone down a little bit there. Cool. We've got some track reverb on here, so just some additional, again, only 8% wet. So your wet and dry down the bottom there is how much of this is going to be in there. So just a second type of reverb. And again, don't be afraid to layer up your reverbs, layer up your delays, go your hardest. Finally, my EQ here. Now, I've added in a little bit of bass, which is a little bit weird, but originally it was sounding a bit too thin when I recorded the original vocal. And sometimes when you're using like a large diaphragm condenser on vocals, your vocals can sound a bit thin. And sometimes just throw a little tiny bit of bass in there. It seems a bit counterintuitive. It tends to work. I've pulled out a little bit of there around 2K, which is just that frequency that I don't like in my own voice, and I've dropped it off the top there again to create a little bit of room. Now you'll see on the far right here, I've also dropped the overall volume down using the EQ. So my vocals were a little bit too loud, and this was after I did my automation. This is a good tip. If you've already automated your vocals, you can't turn the volume down. So if we go back to our track view here, we can't actually turn down the volume on the volume slider there. But if you want to just turn the whole lot down a little bit, and I've shown this a bunch of times, in the visual EQ, we can actually adjust this slider up and down. This one on the far right, this one over here, we can adjust that up and down to just get a little tweak of a few dB of volume or gain up or down, and then we're good to go. So that's sort of the final thing. So all in all, the vocals, let's bring them in here with the guitars and go to our chorus. They sound like this together.
Hope of kings and peasants too. It's a dream of weak and brave.
And again, probably a little bit sibilant. I could probably tweak some of those vocals. Let me know if you think there's some things I need to do differently there, but we'll continue with it, and we'll continue on and look at some of our other instruments now. Let's talk piano now. Piano is the only virtual instrument that we have here. Now, when I say virtual, I mean it's a real piano sample. It's just played with MIDI. So the reason that we have these two different tracks here is that there's one part of the track here where I wanted it to be a lot more reverberant, and I'll show you what I mean here in a minute, but there's no way to add effects differently or to automate effects in GarageBand. So if you do want to automate effects, by which I mean you want a different effect to be on this part than this part, you simply need to duplicate and then copy. And that's all I've done here is I've split the audio, I've duplicated it, and I've moved that audio to this other track, because the only difference here, if we go into our settings here, is the reverb down the bottom left there on this one is a lower reverb than this one. So when we transition between these, I'll leave the whole track on, because this part of the piano here, I wanted to be a little bit sort of more subtle, and then the in-between part, where there's sort of that gap, I wanted the piano to just hold a bit more sustain and a bit more sort of reverb there. Let's take a listen.
Is going to disappear. The only thing that stays will change.
So that's the part that I wanted to really emphasize there, is to make sure that we had additional reverb on that part. Let's take a quick look at the rest of the plugins and EQ, and they're the same on both of these apart from that, because I've just duplicated the track. We'll go into our plugins and EQ. The compression on this is somewhere in between the guitars, so I've got a little bit more compression on here. We've got at 3.6 to 1 ratio, and we've got the threshold there at minus 22 dB, so it is kicking in quite a bit. No additional reverb or anything there. And then the EQ, I've got some quite aggressive EQ at the top and the bottom end. Now, the reason I've got the top end is I wanted this to sort of be have a bit more air in the top end, and the reason I went for the bottom end as well is it's playing some low notes there, and the one thing that was kind of lacking in this song is the sort of low end. And I've actually considered, if I had more time, or if I wanted to, putting in like a cello or a double bass. That's what I was experimenting with before, just to sort of have that low end. But instead what I'm doing is I'm just enhancing the piano, because I like the simplicity, and as soon as I started adding in those strings, because I don't have a real cello or double bass, it just sounded a bit too artificial. So I'm leaving it with this, but to get a little bit more bass. So let's play this just so that you can have a feel for what it will sound like with and without. We'll go to a more complex section here. We'll solo out this track, and this is what it is with that EQ. Now let's turn the EQ off and back on. So it's just bringing it, it's a bit flatter when we don't have the EQ on. We add the EQ and it just gives it that little bit of extra sparkle. And again, if it sounds good, it is good. Like, yes, I'm probably breaking every rule in the how to mix handbook, but it doesn't matter. I don't care. Do you care? The person listening at the end is not going to go, oh, I think he probably did the EQ a way that I wouldn't have done it. No. They might say, hey, there's too much treble in this song overall. You needed to fix that. Maybe. But I think it's good. I think I like it. All right, so let's move on here, because we need to now talk about Dan Baker's amazing violins. So let's jump in and take a listen to those now. So originally this song was going to be guitar, piano, vocal, and that was it. And at the time it sounded pretty good, and I put it out there on the GarageBand users Facebook group and said, hey, what do you folks think? And it sounds a bit like this.
Hope of kings and peasants too.
And at the time, I think someone mentioned, oh, it would sound good with some violins. And then Dan Baker chimes in and says, hey, I play violins. I'll add some violins for you, which was super kind of him. So what he added is these 4 tracks at the bottom here. So we've got 3 tracks of a harmony part of violin and 1 lead part. So we'll unsolo all the rest of mine so that we can actually take a listen. So his lead violin part sounds like this. Which just is amazing and really complements it so well at the start there. I like being able to talk like in superlatives about other people's work as opposed to mine. We then have this brilliant harmony part that comes in the chorus, which I just think really adds to it significantly. It sounds like this. And then we crescendo sort of towards the end here with some sounds like this. That's my favorite part. The da, 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 da. Like it's added in. It's a harmony, but it's melody. Like it's adding to the melody that we have in this track. So, yeah, can't thank Dan enough for the what he did here. Now, what he provided me these tracks, and I have touched them very slightly. I've mixed them with the volume. I haven't done much else. So Dan handed these to me with some plugins and EQ already on here. Not a whole lot in the way of this. Here's the EQ curve that he's added. So I think he mentioned that it was just a bit overpowering, and because we got 3 of these violins and then the 1 lead violin, we've done 3 cuts in here. And I've probably done too much boosting in my EQ so far, but yeah, don't be afraid to cut out the sounds you don't want as opposed to boosting what you do want. So I've trusted Dan and I've left the EQ as it is. If we have a look at the only other thing we really have here is the master reverb that we've got on these tracks. So we've got a little bit of master reverb on all of those. And then the lead one has reverb, and I've also added a little bit of that echo to the lead violin track. So I think that they're sounding good if we bring them back into the mix. So let's go to a part where we have just the lead violin part. And this is, again, one of my favorite parts of it was when we originally, without the violin, it sounded pretty good in this part, but listen to this with the violin.
The only thing that doesn't change is that things will change. And you can choose to kick and scream.
So yeah, it sounds really. Now you're probably hearing there what I'm hearing, which is that the lead vocals there in that part, because we now have violins, we now have guitar, we now have everything in there, and the piano, they probably need to actually go up a little bit. So I'm going to play with the automation of the vocals. So I'll finish off by touching up the vocals again, getting all the instrumental mix right, and then just touching those vocals up with some automation, because I think that's the final thing we need to do with this final mix to get it sounding good and really popping. Now, please watch me, because I mix my vocals too loud. So I'm probably going to push this up too high. So I need to be really vigilant. And if the vocals are too loud in the final mix, which I'll play in full at the end of this video, then yeah, please let me know in the comments and say, Pete, vocals too loud, or at least parts of it may be too loud. Let me know where it's popping out. But that is it in terms of the actual mixing side. Now, I haven't done any volume automation on these violins, because I think Dan did a really good job playing them in. And that's a good tip as well, is that if you can get an even and consistent performance going in with your instrument, then it's going to make it easier. You don't have to do a heap of automation at the back end, because I like automation. It's a great tool, but it's kind of boring to do a lot of automation where you're doing some really sort of finicky and fiddly changes. So anyway, that is it. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to circle back and let's talk vocals, and then we will finish off on this and play this final mix, or close to final mix, and you can let me know what you think. Alright, so I've been playing with the vocals off camera, and I'm not 100% convinced that they're recorded as well as they need to be and that I have the right sound dialed in here. But once I bring it back into the mix, we'll see how it sounds. So you're going to get to hear that at the end here and let me know. I really want to avoid a re-record, because I like the passion and the feeling I have in the vocal. I don't know if I can redo that, but we'll find out. Now, I did promise you a quick look at the automation that we have here. So we'll tap on automation and we'll go in here now. It might look a bit complex, but really all I've done with automation here is in some parts, it's you can see there the volume is a bit lower. So if we tap on that, this is where it gets a little bit tricky. You got to tap and hold to see the volume. So it's at minus 1.9 there in that section, and then as more instruments come in, it's up to minus 0.4. So it's really like 1.5 dB louder there. Then when I start singing louder, I drop it down a little bit, and this is what I'm talking about here, where you can ride the vocal a little bit. You can move it up and down in the really loud sections there. I've dropped it even more, and this is to try and create a consistent vocal performance, because your voice is one of the most dynamic instruments you're going to use. So using some pretty intense volume automation might make your vocals sit nicer in the mix, or at least that's my hope here. But when I play it back, what I might do is spend a bit of time focused on this automation, and you can take a look and let me know. The other thing you'll notice here is that I've used it to remove, or to at least reduce, the volume of some breathing. So let's take a listen to a part here where I'm doing that.
And a fact that never fades. The old
Now you might notice there that I've only reduced the volume, and I've done it in these little V shapes here. So that's just going to drop the volume down a little bit while I'm taking a big breath. You can remove them completely. I don't like to do that. I think it sounds a little bit artificial, especially in a song like this. So I've just done that, and in sections where I'm just sort of doing nothing like that, I've dropped it right down there so that we're not going to be hearing me scratching or whatever the heck I do between verses and choruses. So that is what we've done with that one. The only other things we've got here is the fade out at the end. I haven't actually even faded out Dan's violins because he did such a good job and he recorded it in a quiet environment, so I haven't needed to do that. But we'll see if we need to do that at the very end, if we just want to put a little fade out tail using automation on those ones. But that is it. That is my mix, as close to final as it is right now. Again, I'm going to give you folks a bit of an opportunity to chime in here and let me know. Now, I'm not going to do any major instrumentation changes here, so I don't really want to add different things in, but I'm always keen to hear what you have to say and if you've got any ideas or thoughts on this song. But for now, let's finish up here by playing the full version, and I'll jump around and especially show you some of the key parts and what I've actually done with each of these as the arrangement goes through. So let's do that now.
It's a common misconception. It's a thing that many fear, that the comfort that we have right now is going to disappear. The only thing that stays the same is that things will change, and you can choose to kick and scream, but things will change. It's a hope of kings and peasants too. It's a dream of weak and brave. It's a fear as big as speaking up, and a fact that never fades. The only thing that stays the same is that things will change, and you can choose to kick and scream, but things will change. So what is to be done of it? Oh, and what else do we say when everything we know and love is changing every day? guess things will change.
And there you have it. I think we're pretty close to a final mix for this song. If you've got any comments, questions, or suggestions, though, or things that you think I need to do differently, get in quick because we've almost finished and we're going to finalize and master this song. But you can drop your comments down below. You can also subscribe by clicking and tapping up in the top right. And I hope to see you on the next video.